Okay, I got my notes, which is a good thing because this lesson's a doozy. Okay, welcome back to Carter's Music Theory course. I'm Carter Nash, and this is lesson 3? Lesson 3 of Unit 1. And today we're going to be talking about pitch and keys. Just kidding, we're not talking about pitch, we're talking about scales. I don't even know my own material. I really need to get myself together. If you haven't already, please watch the other 2 videos I just made because those are going to help you a lot with this video and for the rest of this course. Anyway, let's get into it, especially if your name is Colin Nash, because if you're watching this, you're going to like this one. Okay, so we touched on this in lesson 1, but there are 12 notes in our system. And in our system, there are 12 notes between each doubled hertz. The first note and the repeating note of the octave in between there, some number of hertz, double the amount of hertz. That's how it works. And that's an octave. And so we talked about that in the first lesson, but just to clear that up. Okay, and we also talked about this in the first lesson, but it's important that you know this very thoroughly because there are many types of scales. And the 2 most common scales, the major and minor scales, what we do is we take 7 notes from our 12, and those notes in order make a scale, but you don't pick any random notes. They have to be the same distance apart, not between those notes, but between any other pattern of those notes. That made no sense. The defining factor of these 7 notes is the pattern of which notes have more space between them. This goes back to our conversation of whole and half steps. The pattern of a major scale is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Here's an example on the piano of that. Okay, so we have our pattern. If we start on the note C, we have C, up a whole step to D, up a whole step to E, up a half step to F, up a whole step to G, up a whole step to A, up a whole step to B, and up a half step to C. So now when we recount that pattern, we have whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, which is our major scale pattern. Because we started on the key of C, it's our C major scale. Okay, so that was the C major scale. But the thing is, you can take that pattern and start anywhere on the keyboard and have the same sounding scale, but in a different place and in a different key, which we'll talk about in a minute. But there's also different patterns of scales. There's not just major, there's minor. This has a different pattern, which is whole, half, whole, half, whole. And the cool thing about this one is this is just the same pattern as the major scale, but shifted somewhere else. And so you can have the same notes, but just when you start in a different place, they make the minor scale, the natural minor scale, instead of the major scale. Okay, our minor scale pattern. Let's start an A for this one. If we go up a whole step to B, half step to C, whole step to D, whole step to E, half step to F, whole step to G, whole step to A. That's our natural minor scale pattern. So again, that's whole step, half step, whole, whole, half, whole. And notice those are all the same notes as C major. So it's the relative minor key of A minor. It's the same notes, just the scale pattern was shifted over. And of course, there's always exceptions. There's more than just these scales. There's the harmonic minor scales and the pentatonic scales and the chromatic scales, and all of those are cool and awesome, and we're not going to talk about them. And it's important to know that the caveat with scales is these scales are not music by themselves. They are simply tools. You see, you can use a scale and you can use notes from scales in music, obviously, but just having the concept of the C major scale in your mind is not music. You have to use rhythm and usually music notation, and usually you don't have just a C major scale. That's how that is transformed into music. It's a tool, not music itself. Okay, now we're going to move on to keys. Usually in a certain piece of music, the music will stick to the notes in a specific scale. If the piece, for example, is using mainly the notes of the C major scale, and that's the tonal center of the piece, then we're going to call that key C major. That is a setting of the music. In notated music, it's marked by the key signature. So in traditional music notation, again, if you read music, you already know this, the beginning of each line has sharps or flats, showing which notes are adjusted from their normal pitch to fit the pattern of whatever scale is being used and what note it starts on. Sharps, flats, and naturals are all types of accidentals that are used when the music steps outside of just the notes in its specific key and so they are adapting the notes for whatever reason. Also, keys can change within a piece of music. A piece of music doesn't have to be the same key the entire time. So just like time signatures and beats and tempos and scales, they're tools, they're rules, but they're guidelines. They can be broken almost. They help guide you, but they aren't the music itself. And again, we'll dive deeper into keys and intervals and all that in the next unit. For now, I think you guys need to dive into this and see some examples. On the piano. Alright, so one thing I want to clear up first is sharps and flats. So if I take this note, G, for a sharp, I'm moving it one note up, which moves it up to here, which is G sharp. If I flatten the G, we get a G flat, which goes from this note down to this note. So this is now our G flat. That's just something that's really important when we're altering normal white key notes when making things like scales. So speaking of scales, let's try our major scale pattern, but starting on some random note. How about A flat? Up a whole step to B flat, up a whole step to C, up a half step to D flat, up a whole step to E flat, up a whole step to F, up a whole step to G, and up a half step to A flat. So we have our same scale pattern that makes the same kind of sound as C major, just starting on A flat instead of C, as opposed to C major. Now if we were going to do the relative minor of A flat major, let's go to F minor. We have whole, half, whole, whole, half, whole, whole. Same notes, different scale. I would encourage you to practice this by starting on some random note and using our pattern to play your major scale. If it is right, it'll sound like it, and if it's not, it won't. And now we can clearly see why it's called an octave, because if we take our major scale pattern, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then our repeated note is the 8, because it's a common scale pattern, which is where we get the octave from, not from all the 12 notes in between. So last thing we should talk about is keys. The key signature of C major has no sharps or flats, meaning on the piano we'll be in all white keys. Let's play a little something in C major, and you can see how it has C as the tonal center. See how it always wants to come back to this C. That's why C is the tonal center, and that's our key. To demonstrate that keys are just a guideline, not a hard and fast rule, I'm going to use some other accidentals like sharps and flats that will make it a little more interesting, but it'll still feel like it always wants to come back to C, our key. Alright, that is all we have for Unit 1. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and subscribe and comment if you have any questions, and I'll do my best to answer them. Next, we dive into Unit 2, Lesson 1, and that's about the circle of fifths. And if you thought this lesson was juicy, oh, you haven't seen nothing yet. See ya! And them, those, and